Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
And your co-host, Rich Gear, on remote is with you as well. And glad to have you. So, Doug, what are we talking about this evening?
Well, what I'm going to talk about is that the title of the show is "It is not about the evidence." And that is because what I've been observing is that we have a lot of evidence that shows us that the Bible is true, but there's the people don't want it. And I'm finding out that people decide to reject the Bible and God, and even though we have many new creationist organizations out there that proclaim the Word of God and expose the bankruptcy of the Darwinian worldview, and so what I see is that people listen to this message, reject it, and they do so not for lack of evidence or lack of logical arguments, but it's because they don't want to accept the gospel.
What's really difficult, Doug, is when you get people that are unbelievers or a different religious system or an agnostics or whatever. This is more understandable. The reasons are still the same that you're going to list down here. But what I find disconcerting is when you people in the church that basically utilize the same reasons to not believe in the straightforward meanings and writings of Scripture. Yet they claim to be believers. So this is kind of an interesting thing. I think a kind of a conundrum, if you will, that I've noticed that happens a lot. And it's like, we've talked over the years. We've presented evidence over the years. Well, we've been on we've been on the air 30 years, Doug. How close, anyway?
Yeah.
And 93, anyway. And like you say, other creation organizations are out there. There's all kinds of stuff out there. And the evidence is really getting more and more on our favor. I mean, from carbon-14 to the Ice Age to fossils to DNA to, you name it, to all kinds of things. It seems to coming down that the predictions creationists have made over the years are turning out to be valid and accurate. But again, people still reject it and hold on to old arguments many times, just because they want to hold on to unbelief in the biblical account. Now, so Doug, what are some of the reasons that you got down here about why people hold on to Darwinian thinking or even just unbelief in general?
Well, one of the things I notice is that there is a propensity to be offended. There's a lot of people that get offended by God or what they believe God's nature is to be, and they don't understand quite fully what that is. But they have maybe my grandma died, or I've received this blow in life where I didn't get the job I wanted, and the girl that I fell in love with rejected me, and a lot of these things have become reasons to
personal tragedy or personal loss or personal disillusionment. Oftentimes, because what's the first thing they want to do is blame God, who they claim they don't believe in. And so that's where a lot of rejection comes in of biblical text and biblical reality. I agree with you. That is I think that's the biggest thing. Usually personal reasons, not objective scientific ones, are the main reasons. They will use those later on sometimes to try to bolster up why they don't believe. But right down to it, they want to understand how a loving, good God could let tragedy happen or disillusionment happen or disappointment happen in my life. I think oftentimes people have been raised too much in Walt Disney, not enough on Genesis. Mm-hmm. But that's the people don't always live happily ever after in this life. But Doug, there is a corollary to that. For the creationist, we understand that this world has been broken, that it was originally created very good, and that it was broken, and that sin disrupted it. But it's also was subjected to futility, but in the hope there's going to be redemption. And the first part, if you will, of that redemptive story is Christ coming on the earth to make a propitiation, which is a fancy word for saying a substitution or an atonement for our own guilt, our own personal guilt. People say, well, you say Adam and Eve caused the original sin. It's not for their sin. You may be going to hell. It's for your own. It's for your own lack of faith, lack of trust, lack of love for God, lack of reception for the greatest sacrifice that ever happened on the earth. So that was the thing. We understand as creationists that there was a brokenness, but it's been partially mended, and ultimately it will be completely mended. But people, Doug, they just can't see past the nose on their face oftentimes, and I get that. We as human beings are very egocentric. If it's all about us. In some respects, we haven't grown up since we were little babies. Little babies, don't you? It's all about us. It's all about them. And we're the same way even as adults oftentimes. That gets in the way, I think, of faith. And faith is hard. Faith is difficult when you can't see things, but it's not a blind faith, Doug. It's a faith that we do have evidence, although we're not using that evidence to cause faith, where we use that evidence maybe to remove obstacles to faith. Would you say that's a fair assessment, Doug?
I think that's a fair assessment. One of the things I was just reading here, I got a creation update from Creation Ministries International, and the article says, don't tell your children the truth. And of course, that's kind of shocking, and it's meant to be kind of cheeky. And of course, we want to speak the truth to our children, but what he really means is that don't merely tell your kids the truth and leave them unprepared for the challenges that they'll face as they grow up. So they need to know what the lies are and how to recognize them in order for them to accept the truth. And there was he told about a study that was done by a Yale psychology professor in the 1950s to investigate how humans were susceptible to lies. And he had an experiment where he tried to deceive people into believing that brushing their teeth was actually unhealthy.
Really? And what article is this again, Doug? Say that again.
Okay, the article is a creation update, and it's from Creation Ministries International.
Okay.
And so it's just a little flyer that they sent to me as part of their reach out to us.
So they're saying that to understand the truth, you need to present the lies and expose what they are. Is that what's kind of the take on this article?
Basically, that's what it is that in order to be able to for people to recognize what the truth is, you have to understand what kinds of lies are out there, and
yeah.
But
the thing is, Doug, you talk about that because years ago we used to talk about people getting inoculated from the truth because they get just enough truth to not really let them see the whole truth. They get just enough church or just get enough this to really insulate themselves from the real doctrine, the real truth that Jesus is giving to us. And so, and that to me is also kind of where oftentimes lies can slip in. You get immunized from lies because you get just enough truth, and the lies get slipped in. What did Jesus say? Just a little leaven can spoil the whole lump.
Right.
Just a little bit of a lie, even though 90% of it's true, and people don't understand. You got to get the whole truth. What's that? What's the court say? You swear to speak the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I mean, that's the whole deal. that the Bible gives you, but not everybody's willing to hear the whole truth. So they like the stories of Jesus, and they'll read the old stories about Goliath, but they'll treat them like fairy tales. And same thing with Genesis. We've been down to answers in Genesis several times. We're going down again very soon here. Doug and I are going to go down, and but the bathtub arcs, all the cutesy little things that they get just enough truth to insulate them from the real truth. And I think that's what
Right.
happened, Yeah.
It's presented like Sunday school fairy tales.
Yes, that's exactly right.
And that's part of the problem, is that in order to really recognize what the truth is, you need to expose the distortions of the truth. And
Doug, you also mentioned. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I just was curious. You mentioned a couple other reasons why people rejected you. One of you that I thought was kind of interesting was people are embarrassed of the gospel.
That's right. Yeah, and that's revealed in Romans.1 verse 16. And there's the question: is, are you ashamed of the gospel of Christ? And that's what Paul declares: I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. And when they because the gospel of Christ is the power of God in their lives, and when you dismiss it out of hand, or you are sort of this peer pressure, really what it is that you've got the 7th and the 8th graders that they peer pressure you into doing things, and you want to find yourself in the in crowd, and so in order to be and so going to church is sort of like that's for babies or for little kids, and the little shtick that happens in Sunday school sometimes reinforces that. They want to be able to divorce themselves from the final board storyboard Sunday school type of teaching. And when they are in that age group, they need a little bit more meat to be able to recognize it. I remember as a kid, we went to, and I was in the Methodist church, and this was pretty good because we had a speaker who posed himself as the playboy, and our exercise was to persuade him of the gospel of Christ. And
right.
And one of the kids brought up the fact that for life to come about by chance and to evolve, it's sort of like taking a jigsaw puzzle and dumping it all onto the table and expect it to assemble itself. And for me as an 11-year-old, I thought, hey, this kid's come up with something that's pretty profound, and it started me thinking. I think that was one of the very early things that started me thinking down the road of God's creation.
How old were you, Doug, when do you remember how old you were in this?
I was about 11 or 12.
Wow. Yep. That's a time when kids start really questioning things, and it's really unfortunate that oftentimes people in the church just don't really equip themselves, let alone, so they're not able to equip the kids when they start coming up with some really good questions. But in this case, the kid came up with kind of a really, really good answer, didn't he?
He did, yeah. Romans 1:17 it talks about the just shall live by faith, which comes from the book of Habakkuk also. But it's people are afraid to exercise faith. They don't want to put their life in the hands of God, to have them because they feel like they're going to lose control. But in Romans 1:18, it reveals that everybody holds the truth, but if you hold it in unrighteousness, you're going to have the truth distorted.
Well, it also says we have the ability to suppress the truth in unrighteousness.
Right.
In other words, because that's the other part of it, Doug. We talked about different aspects, but the idea that you just want to continue to live the way you want to live, To me, I think that when wasn't it Huxley, I think, said, it might not have been him. You can correct me, Doug, if it's somebody else, but the gist of the idea was, it's not that creation is not just as viable as evolution. It's just that we can't allow a supernatural foot in the door. Okay. Or words to that effect. And so, and that to me shows the prejudicial nature of the Darwinian thinking and the atheistic thinking, if you will, is they want to have this idea that they're in control. But the reality is, you and I, Doug, say, look, no matter what you do, you're going to die. Okay. What control do you have? Did you have control over when and where you were born? No. Did you have control over what kind of DNA is in your body that makes you either smart or talented in one way or another, or not smart and talented in other ways? You have no control over any of that. It's illusion. God is the one who is in control. He's the author and finisher of our faith, but he's also the author and finisher of everything else. And that's the thing these people don't want to come to terms with, I think. There's somebody outside of time and space. He's bigger than you, and he has the ability and the prerogative to make the rules. And he does. He's set the rules, created them, and they aren't egregious. The thing that's really hard, Doug, what gets me is, it's like, I still remember that it was a story. Was with Naaman the leper, I think, Naaman in the kingdom. It was a leprosy, or not Naaman. It was, who was it? Anyway, it was in the Old Testament. My brain is drawing a blank here, but he comes up, and the king had come down with leprosy, and he said, "Tell him bathe in the Jordan 7 times." And the king got all mad, and the guy said, "Well, if he'd asked you or his advisor, I said, if he asked you something hard, you'd have done it." And he goes, "Oh yeah, you're right. Okay." In other words, I got to humble myself to accept the fact there's somebody greater than me that sets the rules, and it's more. And you submit, but then he raises you up into new life. I think that's the cool thing about it. So, but Genesis also, it starts there. The problem with Genesis, it gives you all the parts where everything was broken. I look at it, Doug, you and I, we've talked about this before. You look at the first 11 chapters, which you spend a lot of time in it, and it's very critical. Half the Bible is really in the first 11 chapters of Genesis. And what does the Bible say?
The timeline of the Bible, yeah.
The timeline. And so what really is any mention? You've got Noah's situation, Adam's creation, and Enoch's kind of a nice little thing. He gets translated and caught up into heaven. But everybody else, they lived 900 years, 960 years, whatever. They had kids and died. That's all it says about them. This is really what tells you the importance to God was not about how long they lived or what they accomplished in a short period of time when it comes to eternity, but the fact that it was linking to a Redeemer who was going to come and basically translate us out of our sin and sin nature into heavenly realms, partially and really fully by faith now, but at the consummation of the age, fully will be revealed even as we are. And I mean that, and we shall know even as we are known. Those are promises, I think, Doug, that really float my boat, but it makes everything, the story, it's not just a story, that is a cosmology that makes total sense from beginning to end. And so, but again, we present these over and over again every week, but these things you talk about, they are always going to be in the way. And that's why we do the show we do, is try to remove obstacles to that faith so they can be translated into the kingdom of the dear son,
Well, here are some of the attacks in this article, the attacks that we would anticipate happening to our young people. They'll get these challenges to their faith. They'll hear this, that there's no evidence for God. That's number one. Number two,
okay.
God can't be good because there's too much evil in the world.
All right.
That's another one. The Bible is corrupted as it was copied and translated. And so that's number three.
Yep.
Evolution is a scientific fact, so designer of the living things is unnecessary. And then humans evolved from apes, so Adam and Eve never existed. Noah's flood is impossible. All the world's animals couldn't possibly fit on one boat. Jesus was a good teacher, but he never claimed to be God. And it's unfair for salvation to be through Jesus alone. And a loving God wouldn't send anyone to hell. And so these are all...
The one I've heard, Doug, how about this kind of goes on, it's corollary. God must be the ultimate child abuser. He sends his own son to get murdered.
Yeah, well, I've heard that before too.
Yep.
But when you get down to it, all these questions have been answered, and
Yeah,
if you
absolutely.
all you have to do is a little tiny bit of digging, and the answers are readily available, and actually they've been readily available for years. Except, in my day, it was much harder to ferret them out because the creation message was not so well known. It's just only a handful of ministries that was actually teaching it.
Right.
And once that I understood some of the basics, just some of the things I found out myself with experiments, it helped me understand that there had been a creator. It's the complexity of life and our creation is too much to have come about by chance. And it's basically the jigsaw puzzle again. Not coming, not able to be assembled just by dumping it on the table. And so it's really easy to refute the atheistic worldview, and yet there are people who, though they hear these arguments, um, turn against it and decide that they're not going to follow it because they've got too much baggage that they've been taught. And so Romans 1:20, of course, it tells us that the creation of the world is clearly seen. They understand it by what God has made, so they're without excuse. And then there comes another trouble. They refuse to glorify God, and they're not thankful. And so thankfulness is a cure for it. Teaching people how to thank God and to praise God and to recognize what their blessings are is the key, is the antidote to all this malaise. And then the other thing is pride. Romans 1:22, they profess themselves to be wise, but yet they are fools. And so they become proud of their scientific achievements. I saw a cartoon on Neil deGrasse Tyson's website where it showed you have science over here, the Bible over here, and all these Christians have is the Bible. They don't, but all the science here have this whole list of scientific achievements that have taken place, what man has done. And so this sense of pride doesn't take into account of the fact that over here you have the Bible, God is creator, but his creation is far more complex and intricate and involved than the biggest scientific achievement that man has come about by through their scientific progress. And so I think that his little cartoon can easily be refuted.
Well, that reminds me of, this was several years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago. I can't remember it. A bunch of people from, it was a Christian nightclub that we used to be called Visions. And there was a bunch of them that they asked me about. Richard Dawkins was going to be coming to Michigan State. Of course, he was brought in by the University Atheistic Club or whatever, something like that. I can't remember what it was. And he spent like an hour and a half or a long time trying to tell me why an airplane's wing was designed, but a bird's wing was by accident. And I go, man, the hubris of this presentation was amazing. And when we got out of there, because they were kind of intimidated. This guy's got, this Dawkins has got the, he's got the big reputation, and I got out and I said, let's go see him. So we went and saw him, and I said he did that presentation, and I got at the end of it, I said, well, what'd you guys think? I says, And all the kids said, he didn't really say anything. This is easily shunted aside. It's not, unless you already a priori have a propensity for disbelief. His arguments were really lame. And they just didn't hold up at all, as far as I was concerned. And of course, this was 10 years ago. But I looked at the thing and I go, this is designed, and the complexity of an airplane wing isn't nearly as complex as a bird's wing. You start to analyze a feather, start analyzing all the mechanisms it takes for flight, from the lung of the bird, all this stuff. The complexity just makes an airplane wing look like, well, what? It looks like I can't even, like a rock compared to a plant, I suppose. I mean, it's different, even though I believe all of it was created in that sense. But the complexity, it's unreal. It's unreal. But and so arguments like that, they make these statements, Doug, in arrogance, because they can get away with it. That's the other thing that gets you, is the people who get into the cool club are always the cynics, the atheists, the ones who are anti-God. They seem to get all the press and the play, and that does happen. And I think sometimes there happens to be another issue that happens, Doug, when it comes to, like, we talked about this years ago. Why, let's say, university professors who start out Christian end up becoming unbelievers or very, very watered down believers. And a lot of it has to do with pride, Doug. There's a pride issue involved in the idea, and I think that's what you kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier. They want to be like they're in control, but it's also the idea that they think they think they know better, but more importantly than that, they don't get any recognition unless they're in the cool club.
That's right. And not only that, but they won't get the grants either.
They won't get the grants or the money. Yeah.
Or they'll, if they're a teacher, they'll be demoted and denied tenure. Jerry Bergman talks about that in his Slaughter of the Dissidents books. He's got 3 different books talking about how people who were professors in the academic community lost their jobs or their tenure because they came out as a creationist or
even if you come up with evidence,
intelligent design.
Yeah, even if you come up with evidence that goes against or would go against the dominant paradigm, you're in trouble. You're in danger of losing your tenure or your position. Look at the guy who discovered the collagen and soft tissue and triceratops horns. Didn't he get kicked out of his job? Or I'm trying to.
Mark Armitage.
Armitage, yeah.
And I think it was Northridge University that did that to him, and he received his pension, though. He won his case, and so in that particular case, he made out, sort of. He was not allowed to teach, but they didn't give him. They weren't able to deny him his pension. So,
I even think about the one. What's the gal who discovered hemoglobin in T-Rex bones, but she was not. Yeah. What's her name?
Mary Schweitzer. Yeah.
Oh, Schweitzer. Yeah, Mary Schweitzer. But she held on to evolutionary ideas, despite that fact. And basically, it was the idea that, well, I guess hemoglobin can last 65 million years. I don't know how else she. There's no evidence, in that up until that point that even indicate that could ever last that much. Now they found DNA and they found all kind of unfossilized bones
and carbon-14 in them too. Also.
Oh yeah, carbon-14. So yeah, we've really got a lot of stuff, I think, on our side.
Well, Romans tells us that in verse 23 that they make an idol out of nature. They serve the creature rather than the creator. They end up serving their own lusts, and God gives them up to vile affections, and they do not want to retain God in their knowledge. All right, we'll see you next time on Revolution Against Evolution.